Good afternoon, everybody. The time is now 2 o'clock, and I'll call the Tuesday, April 16th, 2024 Committee of the Whole meeting to order. I'll start by acknowledging that the City of Fort Saskatchewan is located on Treaty 6 territory in Métis Nation, Alberta, District 11. The ancestral and territorial, oh man, I thought I had it. The ancestral and territorial territory of the Nihilwak, Dene, Blackfoot, Saulteaux, Nakota Sioux, and Métis. We acknowledge the many First Nations whose footsteps have marked these lands for generations. It is because of our treaty relationship that we can live, work, and play on Treaty 6 territory. First, I will ask for a motion for the approval of the minutes for the March 19th, 2024 Committee of the Whole meeting. There we go. Mayor Ketcher.
Okay, I'll move the approval of the minutes of March 19th, 2024, Committee of the Whole, as printed and circulated.
Is there any errors or omissions? Not seeing any. Please cast your vote. That is carried. We'll move on to delegations. Delegations is the opportunity for the public to come and speak to anything on our agenda today. There is no one pre-registered, and I don't think I see anyone in the gallery today. So we will move on to presentations. So first of all, we have Mark Plamondon from Alberta's Industrial Heartland Association. Yeah, that's great.
It's on here,
Yep,
right?
Perfect.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much. Thanks for your time today.
Yes. I'll start by congratulating Alberta's Industrial Heartland on their 25th anniversary this year.
Yeah.
We're happy to have you guys.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm joined by David McLean. He's our Director of External Relations. And yes, 25 years, it is, I think, an important milestone to celebrate, and plan to do a few things during the year. Probably the big celebration will be around our annual stakeholder event in September. So thank you for that acknowledgement, and nice to see everybody here today. So our plan here is to just give you an update on what's going on in Alberta's Industrial Heartland. I'll plan for maybe 10 minutes or so, and then leave it open for any questions. Okay. So once again, thank you for your time. So just to remind everybody about Alberta's Industrial Heartland, it is Canada's largest hydrocarbon processing region. Consists of over $45 billion of capital investments. It's home to over 40 companies. And of course, it consists of 5 members: City of Fort Saskatchewan, City of Edmonton, Sturgeon, Strathcona, and Lamont counties, and we have 3 associate members: towns of Gibbons, Redwater, and Bruderheim. And as you mentioned, Councillor Macon, this is a 25-year partnership, and I think, personally, you know, a lot of the success of this association over the 25 years is we've had really good alignment and collaboration across the 5 members, and I think that's really led to a really strong association, and really one that we're all, I think, proud to be part of. Just a reminder as well, I've talked about what we do to you before, but just a reminder, we have sort of 3 strategic pillars that are on the right here. Our reason to be, basically, on the right, we are out there in the world promoting project opportunities for Alberta's Industrial Heartland. This is our marketing efforts, talking to companies around the world to educate them on all the competitive advantages of this region. And then we spend a fair amount of time as well working with governments and identifying competitiveness issues or pinch points on infrastructure to help improve the business case. And a lot of times this is advocacy efforts, work from the external relations team. But in essence, you know, you have 2 components. You're marketing a product, but if that product isn't competitive, what you're marketing, you're still not going to land investment. So you need to have both. You need to have a competitive product, which is Alberta's Industrial Heartland and the investment conditions here. and then you need to be out in the world promoting that, and so we do both of those. And then it's also very important to continue to advance community support and social license, and I think Industrial Heartland, along with our partners in Life in the Heartland, are doing a very good job on this, and I'll talk briefly about that as well in just a minute. Yeah, so again, project opportunities. This is, I'll just skip over the slide, but these are a lot of the types of chemicals and projects that we're seeing in the Industrial Heartland. Lots of petrochemicals, and then a lot of interest in diversified type investments, renewable fuels, battery materials, waste energy, etc. So I'll spend a bit of time on the next two slides. This is basically the update that I wanted to provide for council. These are all the projects that are currently publicly announced that are being studied. So we'll start on the left, these ones that have been completed from a construction standpoint. So we've talked for a few years now about the Heartland Petrochemical Complex. This is Inter Pipeline's polypropylene facility. So this project construction is complete. They are now in operation, and that was, close to around a 5 billion Canadian dollar project. So a fantastic investment for our region, and the first polypropylene production in our region. So pretty exciting project. The next one is Wolf NGL North. They completed their project, I believe it was last year, and that is a fractionation facility. Again, it's adds additional infrastructure in this region for separating out of the liquids in the natural gas stream, natural gas liquids, and just adds advantage to our region. And now there's a number of projects that have been announced that are currently under development. So the first on this screen here on the right is the solar project, Scotford Solar, that is Shell Canada and Silicon Ranch. So they are currently constructing a 58 megawatt solar farm, and that will be providing electricity to Shell Canada Energy and Chemicals Park at Scotford. So that's 58 megawatts. So that's an exciting renewables, zero emission electricity project in our region. Secondly, Plains Midstream is currently undergoing an expansion of their fractionation facility at their Fort Saskatchewan site. So that's additional infrastructure. That'll be 30,000 barrels a day. That's currently under construction. The more fractionation facilities in our region that continues to bring natural gas liquids that can then lead to additional upgrading in our jurisdiction just continues to add to the value add and the hydrocarbon processing story here in the Industrial Heartland. Pembina, RFS4. So this is their quite a significant construction. They are building its fourth fractionation facility, 55,000 barrels a day. That's across the river in Sturgeon County. So that brings their total fractionation capacity to 256,000 barrels a day. So that's the largest fractionation capacity in the Industrial Heartland. So again, just continuing to expand on the value proposition in our region. And then, of course, you are all very familiar with the very exciting announcement from Dow that the board has sanctioned their Path to Zero project. This is the world's first net zero integrated ethane cracking complex, and that's going to utilize hydrogen as a clean fuel, utilizing third-party carbon capture sequestration. So one of the great exciting things about this investment announcement is, of course, a world-class company like Dow and a world-scale company like Dow making an announcement that the world's first ethylene manufacturing facility is here in Alberta's Industrial Heartland. That just really adds to the value proposition here and helps with the marketing story around that. If you want to meet both your economic and your environmental goals, this is a jurisdiction in which that can be done. So this is a great story for the Industrial Heartland. And now there's a number of additional projects that have been announced over the last year and a little bit before that around being under study at this point. So all of these projects are under study. They are all taking advantage of our cheap natural gas feedstocks and our carbon capture sequestration infrastructure and geology that's in this region. The first is a memorandum of understanding between Shell and Mitsubishi. They're looking at producing low carbon hydrogen and ammonia to provide low carbon energy products to Asian markets. The second one, Itochu Petronas and Inter Pipeline had announced that they are also studying a low carbon hydrogen ammonia facility for export of low carbon energy products to Asian markets. there's a theme here, right? These are all partnerships with Asian companies looking to get low carbon, low cost energy products from Alberta into Asian markets. So Pembina and Marubeni also reached a memorandum of understanding to study low carbon ammonia facility using carbon capture sequestration to export projects to Asian markets. The fourth one here, this one's more focused on the Korean market, but this is Hydrogen Canada. They've partnered with E1, a Korean firm, on moving ammonia to Asian markets again. And then the final one, Kansai Electric Power, again, a Japanese company, along with ATCO, looking at, again, taking low-cost natural gas, producing hydrogen and ammonia using carbon capture sequestration to have a low-carbon product and export that to market. So a very exciting time with respect to studies. These projects are under study, and we're doing the best we can to help them advance as much as possible. And then the final three I wanted to just bring to your attention. Varma Energy had announced that they'd signed an agreement with the City of Edmonton to take some of their municipal waste. They are looking at building a waste-to-energy facility in the industrial heartland. So that would be taking municipal waste through to producing either steam or electricity for industrial use here in the industrial heartland. Alpine Sun, they are studying a large 200-megawatt solar farm, again, producing zero-emission electricity in this region. And then finally, Fortune Minerals have been studying a cobalt, gold, copper, and bismuth refinery in the industrial heartland, taking ore from the Northwest Territories or concentrate from the Northwest Territories, bringing it down here into the industrial heartland to refine it into these products. Again, taking advantage of the infrastructure and the competitive advantages that are here in order to value add natural resources in Western Canada. So these are a number of the projects that have been announced. Also, just want to talk about two other slides here for you. As David and his team are focused on improving the business case for the industrial heartland, there's been a number of announcements that are relevant to us and the industrial heartland. There's been a number of incentives, federal investment tax credits for hydrogen, and the government of Alberta announced a carbon capture and sequestration investment credit as well. It's called the Alberta Carbon Capture Incentive Program, ACIP. So that's exciting. That will provide additional provincial support for carbon capture and sequestration projects here. And then also in the budget, in the 2024 budget for the government of Alberta, they allocated funding over 3 years, $32 million to the designated industrial zone, which is basically the industrial heartland, to look at water intakes and water infrastructure for industrial processes. So continuing to add to the competitive advantages of this region by investing in infrastructure in this region. They've also put some funding in and illustrated their support for continuing with Vinca Bridge replacement, which is an important infrastructure project for our region. And then, of course, they continue to streamline the regulatory approvals. And then finally, the third pillar is advancing our social license. We do that in partnership with Life in the Heartland. We just held our latest Info Eve in Gibbons. I think we had over 175 attendees there. I think this is a really good forum for residents to come out and hear from companies, learn about what's happening in the region, and continue to build relationship and communication between industry and community in the region. LITH has also launched a podcast, which I think is another media to get the message out. And there's been community surveys, and we continue to work with our partners like Fort Air Partnership and others. So I think Life in the Heartland really continues to be, I think, a model, a world-leading model around partnerships and collaboration between industry, municipalities, and between residents, so industry, residents, and municipalities, to continue to build trust and social license in this region so we can continue to have industrial growth here. That is a very quick update. I was a few minutes longer than I'd said, but I believe there's still some time for questions. Happy to hear any if you have them.
Awesome. Thank you for your presentation, Mark. It's always great to have you here. I'm sure there'll be questions if I can get this to work. So we'll start with Councillor Harris.
Thanks, Mark. Informative as always. Question about the solar projects, obviously with our provincial government not being supportive of renewables and their really strange stance on that. We don't have the same context up here in an industrial area, but the question I've got, has that particular policy stance caused problems for either the Scotford solar project or this one that potentially is under study with Alpensun?
Right. So great question. I'll have David say a couple of things. First of all, the Shell project is under construction, and that's going ahead, and it's under construction, so we're fine there. I think anything else that was under construction, under study, would have been caught up in that moratorium on permits. But there is also some nuance with this being an industrial zone, and I think that's being considered by the government.
Yeah, certainly it contributed to some uncertainty in the region. The intention, I think, of the policy, it doesn't really apply to the designated industrial zone so much as other areas. Example, the attention to viewscapes is really a wind farm kind of issue. So it added to the uncertainty, but we're pretty confident these projects are still in the process and willing to go forward.
So I guess in a heavy industrial area, smokestack industry zone, something like a solar farm wouldn't necessarily be seen as a negative, as opposed to down in Pincher Creek, you're looking at mountains.
Yeah, and in conversations with Minister Neudorf's office, the intention wasn't directed toward the Alberta Industrial Heartland. It was other regions of the province.
Okay, so the whole planning model for this zone ultimately contributes very positively, I would suggest.
100%. It's fully recognized that this is a designated industrial zone. This is an area of Alberta designated towards industrial growth, and that will serve us well, I think.
Good, thanks.
Councillor Blizzard?
Hello, thanks for the presentation. One thing that caught me was and maybe this is almost like a swear word, do we need pipelines? When they're producing, these companies are looking at hydrogen and ammonia and methanol and getting it to the Asian market. The way I've been reading it is that pipeline is an issue. Is there enough capacity for them at the moment? Do you have to advocate for new pipelines?
Right. So right now, a lot of the conversation and part of the studies on logistics would be looking at rail logistics through to the coast. Again, I don't speak for any of the companies, and they will proceed in the best fashion for them. But we have a world-class rail infrastructure to the Port of Prince Rupert, and that's an avenue for exporting clean energy products.
So they'd be using rail, not pipeline at all.
Again, I don't want to speak for the companies, but
Okay.
I want to emphasize that there's world-class rail infrastructure to the Port of Prince Rupert, and there's capacity on those lines. Yeah.
Okay, I'm sure ideally pipelines would be better, eh?
Yeah. So, it depends on volumes and everything, right? So.
Okay, thank you.
Mayor Ketcher?
Okay, thank you, and congratulations. It's on 25 years, been on there quite a few years with you. Can you just talk to everybody about why, and I know we call it designated industrial zone, but the advantages of having all of this industry within one area and the clustering and what they do for each other? Because so often people think, well, it's just one company and they're working in a silo. Can you just explain that for everyone?
Yeah, I'll give a little bit of color there. So, the cluster, there are cluster benefits for industrial development, and having all of these industries in one region has a number of benefits. First of all, you can gain a number of efficiencies on all sorts of things. You can gain efficiencies on emergency response. You can gain efficiencies on transportation. Outputs from one can become inputs to another. The larger the cluster is, the more competition you would have for outputs and more optionality you have for inputs and outputs. And so growing the cluster continues to add competitive advantage, which then continues to really build this as a world-leading region. So the clustering really makes a lot of sense. And then from a designated industrial zone standpoint, which is what the designation from the government of Alberta, that's really enabled them to streamline the regulatory process in this region for a number of reasons. One is you can do a number of studies up front. Two, you've got decades of studies and understanding already on the environmental footprint of the companies that are here. And then three, you can model out where you think growth is and how that looks from a cumulative effects standpoint. And so all of this really adds value when you do it in a cluster form. And we continue to encourage, the work, and we work with the government of Alberta to continue to grow the cluster. We think that's the most efficient and most environmentally friendly way to advance industrial growth in Alberta.
Okay, thanks. And the second question, so AIHA seems to have a very good relationship and credibility with the provincial government. What about the federal government? Let's talk about them and what our needs are with them and how we advocate or lobby with.
Perfect.
Yeah, I would say we have strong relationships with both levels of government. The past year, we've seen some significant policy change that has benefited our region at the federal level. So they put forward responding to industry concerns about our competitiveness with regions like the U.S. Gulf Coast and the Inflation Reduction Act. They brought together a hydrogen investment tax credit, carbon capture investment tax credit, clean electricity tax credits, all of which helped move the needle, helped us compete globally. So those, and of course, we're still waiting to see those things finalized, but really some strong progress. And in Alberta, likewise, the Alberta Carbon Capture Incentive Program, very aggressive, and it really, according to our analysis, really helps level the playing field with places like the U.S. Gulf Coast. So relationships are strong, and policy is moving in the right direction.
Great, thank you, and keep up the great work.
Councillor Abadwe.
Thank you, and thank you, gentlemen, for your presentation. You obviously do very valuable work, which is very appreciated, so thank you for that. My question is, so Fort Saskatchewan is, like you rightly said, it's strategically located, right in the heart of the heartland, and with all this feedstock, so, it's helping industry flourish. And with the Dow projects, so we've had that it's 8,000 construction workers at the peak of construction and 400 permanent jobs. I think the closest in this region to that amount will be the Interpipeline projects. So my question is, and by all means, if you don't have an answer, that's fine. From your perspective, are there lessons learned or insights from the Interpipeline project that you think that we can implement here as we go on with the Dow projects? And just from your perspective.
Right. Thank you for the question. And if I can understand your question, you're really talking from the construction phase here and all the activities with the construction. Is that what you're referring to?
Yes, but I just wanted to hear from your perspective. You've seen how the Interpipeline projects went through. It's completed. That's great. So now we're faced with another project. Yeah. 11 billion is going to be a lot of impacts to the community as a result. Are there some insights? And again, like I said, if there is no answer, that's fine. I'm just curious from your perspective as Alberta Industrial Heartland.
Thank you. Sure. I'll just make a couple of comments. Certainly industry and working through industry associations, there's learnings from the big projects that have happened in the Industrial Heartland and how that's been managed, from managing workers, et cetera, from NWR to IPL. Also, a company like Dow has done these big projects around the world, and they've got teams of people who have done this before and really know how to mobilize the workforce and the equipment that's needed. So certainly the expertise is there. From our perspective, if I just take a look at an Industrial Heartland perspective, and our role is, as we pointed out, sort of threefold. We are looking to promote the region, we're looking to improve the competitiveness of the region, and we're looking to continue to build social license. What we continuously build off each project that comes along is it adds to the value proposition from the clustering that we just talked about. It adds to the story around why the heartland, the competitiveness. So we can take information from all these projects and apply it to the marketing component of this. And then from a community perspective, which is maybe more where you're coming from as well, we can continue to leverage, again, the learnings of previous projects, utilizing the LITH forum to continue to really continue to build trust in the community around the good corporate social responsibility and what companies are doing and what the community is seeing. So I'm maybe not answering your question directly, but that maybe gives you some context as to how we sort of view these large projects and how we can leverage them in the work that we do.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I know it's somewhat outside of your jurisdiction, but I was just curious to hear from your perspective. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Done? Okay, thank you. I'm just going to pop a question in here. I'm just curious, 25 years, a long time. Do you know how much land the Alberta Industrial Heartland had to work with, say, day one versus, what has been taken up now through different projects that we've seen to completion through the years? Like what?
Yeah,
Do we have a lot of land left? What is?
Yeah, so the land mass is 582 square kilometers. When I look at we have a land holdings map that shows where the facilities are and what companies own which area, et cetera. It's in the order of 10 to 15%. So there's significant land, flat land, pre-zoned heavy industrial for continued development. We're not going to be short of land. Land is not going to be our constraint. I think we're fine there.
Okay, great. Thank you. Next, I'll move to Councillor Nguyen.
Sorry. Yeah, thanks for being here this afternoon. It's always exciting to hear from you. And obviously, extremely important work in our region with large industry, and it's great to see some of the successes and the upcoming projects. My question has to do with water intakes and drought mitigation, and it's a question that I get asked about a lot. Obviously, concerned residents about the lack of snowfall and rain in the last few years. So how's that integrated right now, and what discussions are happening with drought mitigation and the increase in water demand that an expanding industry, large scale industry, can have?
Yes. So I'll make a couple of comments. I'll let David make a couple of comments as well. So we're very fortunate in this region. Very fortunate. So the watershed in the North Saskatchewan River, the water flows. Significant volume, capacity to manage the growth that we're seeing in this region. Having said all that, of course, the government of Alberta and Alberta Environment and Parks, they are the ones who grant water licenses for access to water in the river. So all of that is taken into account when they grant access to water. But from a growth perspective in the Heartland, we had a study done recently with respect, as all part of the designated industrial zone, and the water resources and the capacity of that river are substantial and sufficient to provide growth in this region. So we are much more fortunate than in the southern parts of the province. So where you're hearing on the news and a lot of concerns around the water and drought, et cetera, it really has to do in the southern part of Alberta. And here the North Saskatchewan River really continues to provide significant water flows that will meet industrial growth in this region. Do you want to?
And in recent work done by the province or funded by the province looking at the long-term capacity of the North Saskatchewan River, it's also a pretty good story, even if you model out the doubling of the population of Edmonton and the region. They still forecast we've got ample water to meet all needs, including industrial needs. So we're really lucky. I think from in terms of social license and in how we communicate, we have to understand that concern is out there. And it's really easy to confuse our water system, our drainage here, with the issues that they're experiencing in the south, which are much more acute and serious. So of course, water consumption and water conservation is important, and industry always improves in terms of their water use, or continues to improve. But right now we're looking pretty solid in terms of availability of industrial water.
Great. Thank you. That's great to know.
Okay, we might have a few more on round two. We'll go to Councillor Blizzard.
Just something that Councillor Macon said made me think. So I would say Alberta's Industrial Heartland Association is a success, but I don't know how you define success. When we look at cities, we look at population or housing, you know, what's in there. So she had asked a question of land use, but I think originally she also included, you know, 25 years ago, how much land was used and how much is now. Have we seen an increase, or is it just that we're keep encouraging new use when something shuts down? Do you know what I mean?
Yes. Sorry, there, is that working? Yes, no, there's new companies and new facilities over the 25 years, no question. So continue to see a growth in the industrial sector that has required the development of some contiguous acres for sure. So yes, we are seeing growth.
And do you ever look at, you know, the value of, you know, when we do taxes, we get a value of what the businesses are. Do you ever compare that? Is that something that you do?
Yes. So our association, in fact, the whole model of the association, I think it was very astute when it was first set up, is the funding is based on an incremental amount, a portion of the incremental taxes that come from development. And so, yes, we have those numbers, and that's how the funding is calculated for the Industrial Heartland Association. It is a small portion of the incremental taxes. So, yes, we know what those numbers are.
So how much has it gone up over 25 years? Any idea?
I'll have to get back to you. I'm sorry. I don't know.
Just curious. I guess that's the bottom line.
I have the number, and I'll make note to get it to you, but I don't know it off the top of my head. I'm sorry.
Oh, that's okay. Thank you.
That looks like all the questions for you. Thank you so much for being here today, and we look forward to celebrating with you guys in the fall. 25 years is a fantastic milestone.
Thank you very much for your support. I really appreciate it. And your time. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Next, we have our 2024 Municipal Property Assessment Update. I'd like to welcome Mike Krim from Tanmar Consulting. Well, Mike makes his way up here. I'll just acknowledge that Councillor Blizzard is our member of council who sits on CRAS, Capital Region Assessment Services Commission, that works with our assessors. Welcome back.
Great. Thank you, Madam Chair, for having me this afternoon. Always a pleasure to report to Council and Mayor and everybody else on what's happened, what's transpired in the assessment for the last year. So I've got a short presentation, then I'm happy to answer questions, and please interrupt me anytime if you do have questions during the presentation. So for summary this year, we now have 11,828 taxable assessment parcels within the City of Fort Saskatchewan. That includes 11,150 residential, 59 farmland parcels, and 619 non-residential parcels, including designated industrial. Total taxable assessed value is now $7.72 billion, of which $4.29 billion is residential and farmland assessed value, and $3.43 billion is non-residential assessed value. Of that $3.43 billion, you have just under $2 billion of designated industrial assessed value. You have $614 million of heavy industrial non-designated industrial assessed value, and $855.6 million of commercial and light industrial assessed value. Our current or new valuation date for assessment purposes for market value properties is now July 1st, 2023. And our average assessed value for a single family detached home is now $444,000, which is an increase from the average last year of 4.1%. That 4.1% includes growth, 3.4% market inflation on single family dwellings. So July 2022 to July 2023 would have been that 3.4% market inflation. $322,000 assessed value for a single family attached home. This is duplex and triplex properties. And again, an increase of about 4.2%, including growth, or 4% for just market inflation. And the average assessed value on a condominium now is $199,500, which is an increase of 2.8%, including growth, and 2.3% for market. It says deflation there, but that's inflation, sorry. This map is a change by neighborhood that I always like to present, and it shows the varying or various locations, zones throughout the city, and their average market inflationary increase from a low of about 2.2% in Forest Ridge up to a high of about plus 5.5% in Windsor. And everything else in between falls in that 3.5%, 4% range. This chart shows that 79.51%, so that brown line that swings way out to the right, 79.51% of your single-family properties change between +2 and +6% in the city this year. Anything above that will likely have had some renovations, growth. New housing would be everything that's more than 20%. Anything below that, we would have made some changes because of issues that we found throughout the year, properties that had fire damage or demolition due to fire, those kinds of properties. This slide shows some of the market changes in the general region for single-family properties. So in St. Albert, they saw an increase of 2.2. Stony Plain was 6.6%. Spruce Grove 3.1. Devon 3.3. Edmonton 1.5. Sherwood Park 3.6. Beaumont 6, and Leduc 5.2. So Fort Saskatchewan fits pretty well into that average for the Edmonton region. On the multifamily side, apartments were up 3.8% on average, and Edmonton saw a decrease of 0.6. Sherwood Park's apartments were up a bit more at 7%. Stony Plain was at 5. St. Albert at 8.6. Spruce Grove apartments were down, and Beaumont's, Leduc's, and Devon's were all up by 1.7, 1.9, and 2.6%. On the commercial side of things, we saw an overall increase in the commercial market values of 2.4%. That includes downtown at just under 2, and the highway commercial at 2.8, and then the mall redevelopment, we didn't see any changes there, so straight across the board there. Other jurisdictions you'll see are very similar across the board, except for Edmonton. They had a fairly significant decrease on their office inventory of up to 15.7% to the negative, but they saw about 3.8% on the retail side. Hotels are always an interesting one because we've had some significant impact through the COVID years on hotels throughout the region. Fort Saskatchewan's hotels are up a little bit this year, 3.3%. And that is actually quite a bit less than some of the other ones. Edmonton was showing 17, Sherwood Park 19, Stony Plain was roughly the same at 4.5, St. Albert 11.3, Spruce Grove 17, and Leduc 14. So hotels in the region have generally recovered somewhat from COVID. After the COVID issues that they experienced, we're going to spend a little bit more time this year in make sure that we monitor what's going on in Fort Saskatchewan, and hopefully we can get some more market inflationary process or procedure through hotels for this next year. On the light industrial side, we saw a 5.7% assessment increase on average, and that fits in with the area which all saw an increase from 0.4% in Edmonton all the way up to plus 7% in Leduc. For growth, residential growth this year, we saw $111 million worth, and that was as a result of 173 new single-family and 34 new duplex, fourplex dwellings added to the roll. It also includes growth from previous new progressive builds, which are now complete. So properties or houses that were started in 2022 and they finished and were occupied in 23. There would be some growth from any updates or upgrades that were done due to renovations and other changes. And we also saw some new residential lots registered in Windsor Point and in South Fort Meadows. On the non-residential side, we did have commercial and light industrial growth of $25.8 million. There was some new construction, downtown Market Square. There's a fire rebuild going on there. New John Deere facility on the highway, new co-op distribution center, and then that area where that new John Deere shop was built, that's all brand new industrial land development. On the heavy industrial side, there was a total of $48.1 million in growth. The designated industrial property growth done by the province, there was some at Dow Chemical, ME Global, Wolf Midstream, and there was also some with your linear telecommunications. And on the non-designated industrial side of things, Nutrien increased their facility side and did some upgrades to their furnace and other components. Sherritt and Carefco had routine changes and replacements. Carefco also had some minor upgrades. This is an overall growth versus inflation summary showing what your total assessment was at last year, what it's at this year. So from 7.33 billion in total taxable assessment to 7.722 billion in total taxable, roughly 2.5% in growth and 2.75% in inflation. We do a review of 20% of all property assessments every year. So that's what we call our rotational assessment. And in 2023, these areas were the areas that we concentrated on. So residential areas in the older areas of town, north of downtown, south of downtown, and then further over to the west as well. And for those properties, for the last number of years, we've been coordinating with the city staff to send out requests for information on residential properties. So last year we sent out almost 1,500, and we did get a 73.3% response rate, which was up from last year and up from 2 years ago. And that's an excellent response rate, and we're going to continue to do that. We're getting really good information on our yearly requests for information. On the non-residential side of things and multifamily, we also send out yearly requests. Approximately 244 properties get a request for information every year, and we get just over 50% response rate, and that's been pretty typical, and we have ideas on how we can try and get a little bit better response rate there as well. So for a recap, in 2023, if you recall, we did our first year of separation of assessment and tax notices. And on the residential side of things, we fielded a similar number of calls and inquiries as in previous years. We did have 10 registered assessment appeals on the residential side, and those were tax agent and self-representation. That was up from previous years. Not unexpected, being that it was the first year of a new process with the separation of notices. None of them went to the assessment review board, so they were all either withdrawn or we reviewed the assessments and provided a revised assessment that the ratepayer was happy with. On the non-residential side, we've again fielded a similar number of calls as previous years, and we did get 21 registered assessment appeals. Most of those are tax agent representation, and that was up from the previous year, and one went to the assessment review board. Thus far, notices were mailed in January 26th. The appeal deadline was April 5th. And when I put this presentation together, so as of April 1st, we'd had the similar number of calls. We typically get 60, 70, 80 calls per year. We had one registered assessment appeal on the residential side at that time. And on non-residential, we did not have any registered assessment appeals. As of today, the deadline's over as of April 5th. And we do have a total of 21 appeals registered, of which 3 are single-family dwelling, 4 are multifamily, so apartment complexes, and the remaining 14 are commercial industrial. And we're currently working through those, talking to anybody that's appealed or any tax agent that is acting on behalf of the ratepayer. And that concludes my presentation. I'm happy to answer questions.
Thanks for your presentation. 73% response rate is pretty great. I'm just wondering if the city should hire Tanmar Consulting for our next survey, because that's pretty awesome. So good job with that. I see there's questions coming in now, so I'll go to Councillor Blizzard.
Hello, thanks for your presentation. I'm new on Crest, so still learning a lot. But can you talk a little bit about how value is determined for hotels, commercial, and heavy industry? Because a house, I know you go by July 1st the previous year, and you can use the sale of houses in the area to get a value, but that's not very easy to do with some of these other ones.
Thank you. Excuse me, Madam Chair, through to Councillor Blizzard. Single-family residential based on a market value standard as of July 1st the previous year. And with single-family, there's always lots of sales. So there's a significant database of information that we can have access to help us in our quest to value those properties. Non-residential properties such as commercial, strip commercial, for example, retail, we ask for rental information from the property owners or landlords, and we are able to convert that income information that we do receive into a value in real estate. It's called the income approach to value. We're not valuing the specific business that's within that commercial space. We're valuing how much rent can be attributed to that space and capitalizing that value. Light industrial is similar to non-residential property, but we also employ another method called the modified cost approach. So we use a cost manual in addition to land value to come up with our values. And then heavy industry, I'm not an expert in, so I would only be speaking at a very high level. Heavy industry that's used for processing and manufacturing would be based on significantly on regulated rates that are provided by the province.
What about hotels? What happens there?
Yes, thank you. Hotels are also based on the income approach to value. So we are attempting every year to get information from hotel owners. During COVID years, that information was coming to us pretty frequently because they were suffering badly. But in the last year, that information has not come to us as quickly as it used to. So we'll be spending some more time on the hotels this year.
So if a hotel is empty, per se, your taxes would be way lower. I mean, it's still got value. How does that work?
The value of the hotel is based on the income attributable to it. So if they have significant loss in that income over a period of time, 1, 2, 3 years, and certainly it's been that way during the COVID years, that can have a significant impact on the value of that hotel until it recovers and starts getting higher occupancy and higher rates.
Okay. Got another question, but I don't know if that
Go ahead.
counted as more than one or not, but
No, you're okay.
so in the surveys you were saying 73% replied and 50 on the other. Are they mandatory? What happens if nobody filled them out?
Thank you for that question. They're not mandatory. They are a best practice that we've employed and many municipalities have employed recently in order to get information that might not always be easy to get. People are very vigilant. They don't typically want anybody at their house, let alone an assessor. And we found that going through a residential or a request for information process has enabled us to get information that we would otherwise not get. If they don't reply, we through the city, we definitely send them out reminder request for information. And if that still doesn't generate a reply, then we will be stopping by the property.
Okay, because I could see people hesitating, put a new roof in, added something on, and they're scared that maybe they're going to be assessed way higher. So, that might deter them from answering. That's why I wondered.
Yeah.
Thank you. Go to Councillor Abatoye.
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation, and thank you, Councillor Blazer. That was one of my questions. But my first question is, so all these numbers, are they as at July 2023, all the data on this presentation?
That's correct.
Yes, it is. Okay. So my question is specifically on the condominiums. So you said there was a market deflation, but there's also a plus there. So that's like until you said deflation during this presentation, when I read this, I thought it was inflation because I saw a plus right there. So that was a little confusing for me. But to my question, so these condominiums you're referring to here, that's townhouses and apartments, condos, right? That's like all condos, basically.
Correct.
Right.
Madam Chair, through that, Councillor Abatoye, that is residential condominiums that include row condominiums, apartment condominiums, correct?
Right. So just going back to the way these numbers are calculated, I took a look at the July 2023 stats, and specifically for apartment condominiums, there was a fall year over year compared to the previous year of about 4%. I'm just rounding things up, right? And for townhouses, there was like an increase of about the same. And so I'm thinking, like, if it's like an average of all of this, then how do we have an increase of plus 2.8%? I'm trying to make a sense of all these numbers, right? So just because in your response to Councillor Blazer, you said that's the way you get this valuation might be, market prices as well.
That's correct.
Are there other things that's other factors that you consider, when you're coming up with these numbers? Because based on my calculation, that number should be like 0.1, for example, just off of my head. So are there other factors? Like, how do these numbers, like the market prices and these numbers, I feel like they are usually different, right? So I guess my question is, how do they compare to, how the market prices compare to the property assessments? Because again, when I look at the numbers, based on the numbers and the market values as at July 2023, it should be different. So I'm okay with the single family and duplexes, but specifically with condominiums.
Okay.
Is my question clear?
I think it is.
Okay, good.
And Madam Chair, through to Councillor Abatoy, I think I can answer that. We receive or we follow the Land Titles Registry database, which we get a monthly distribution of all the properties that sell. Many of those properties sell several months prior. Okay, so you might be looking at something that says July over July and talking to a real estate specialist that's looking at exactly July over July, and we're looking at something that might have been registered 3 months earlier but didn't get registered in July. So there could be some lag time in between that might contribute to some of the differences that you might be thinking are there.
Okay, now that makes sense, because I was looking at the specific houses that sold in July, right? Not okay. So that makes sense. If you're going with land titled numbers. I think I had one more. Yeah. So you made a statement about hotels. So you said that this year you're going to be focusing a little more on them. How is it different? Like, why? Okay, I get why you're doing it, but how would that number be different from what you did last year? You get what I mean? If you're focused, like, shouldn't you have focused on them last year? Is what my question is.
Well, every year, to answer your question, every year we try and focus on every property. We're trying to establish a market value on every property. If we don't have any property sales of hotels, and we didn't until recently, and we only get like a 20% response rate from our hotel owners, there's not much we can do other than try and establish a fair market value assessment, knowing what we know and knowing what's happened in previous years. What's driving me now to think that we need to spend more time on hotel operators is, one, they didn't respond to our request last year, and two, the region saw significantly more market value increase on average when we look at Edmonton and Sherwood Park and St. Albert. And talking to some of those other assessors, we definitely need to spend a bit more time on them this year.
Right. Okay, I get it. So by spending more time, you mean like getting that information from them that you're not getting. Got it. Right. Okay. No, but I appreciate your response, because I remember a few years ago when the evaluation was like minus 20%. That was huge. So 3.3% is definitely a lot better, but all the best with going after them this year. Thank you.
Thank you.
Moving on to Mayor Ketcher.
Thank you. So every time you come and you talk about assessment, and then people get their tax bills and go, my taxes are up, how come? Can you just reaffirm, so in an area, so you say 3% in West Park. So that's the overall area, and that's based on what houses are selling for right now, but it doesn't mean everybody's taxes are going to go up that 3%. It's only based on what the city comes in at. It's always confusing for people, including me.
Thank you, Your Worship. So in an area, if the average assessment inflationary increase was 3.8%, and your assessment increase was 3.8%, then you should see a tax increase that's equivalent to whatever the budgetary increase is in the city of Fort Saskatchewan for that year. If your assessment increase is less than that 3.8%, then you should generally see a tax increase that would be less than that budgetary increase that's planned for. If your assessment increase was higher, then you should generally see a higher than average tax increase. At a high level, that's the way it works.
Oh, okay. Okay, gotcha on that one. On your graph that you're showing growth versus inflation, and I'm not sure if this question is for you or for city manager or finance. So when we talk about the growth amount of the assessment, I guess the question is, so when administration starts doing their budgeting, this may be for Troy, do you have an indication of what what the growth amount is going to be, and do we have any indication already now? So if they're telling us like the new growth is this amount versus the inflation amount, like how does that affect the taxation when it comes in?
So for the 2023 budget that's about, or sorry, the 2024 budget that's about to be finalized coming up in May, we will know what our growth was for 2024, but we don't know that until a few weeks before we know what it is now. But when you're talking about planning for next year, for 2025, typically what administration does is do an estimate based on historical growth rates. And I think Mr. Krim also helps us out with an estimate as well, based on what he thinks is what it'll look like. And so when the budget gets debated in the fall, it's done with estimates.
Okay. So just, I guess my question, so as you have projects that were mentioned for the Heartland with Path to Zero, Plains Midstream, those ones that are in the billions of dollars or multi-millions. So how do we take those into account for their time periods and future revenues?
I think with those select few extremely significant ones, we would probably start to engage in a bit of pre-planning. Like when Dow did their furnace expansion, we knew those funds were coming, and they were accounted for in the budget during the budget debates. And I think the same with Dow. I think what council's going to need to do is a few years in advance of the Dow construction coming to an end and the property taxes kicking in, council's going to want to have a conversation about, I would almost say it's a financial planning conversation of sorts to decide what that will look like when the revenue kicks in.
Okay. Okay, I'm good. Thank you.
Thank you.
It doesn't look like there's any more questions. Thank you very much for coming again. It's always great to see you, Mike.
Thank you very much.
All right. Next, we have the 2024 Designated Industrial Assessment Update. We have Tim Seefeld and Arla Pertel. If I said that wrong, I'm so sorry. From Municipal Assessment and Grants, Municipal Affairs. And once you're all settled there, maybe you can introduce who you have online today with you as well. Just push the button. There you go.
Good. You can hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Actually, I'm Arla Pertle, and with me today is Chris Bodez. So Tim is on the list, but that was a previous presentation. So
Welcome.
thanks. So good morning. Thank you for, good afternoon. Thank you for taking the time today to listen to our presentation of designated industrial property, and more specifically, the provincial assessment role in your municipality. So before we get started, I want to point out that we're presenting a revised version of of the slides that were presented earlier with council due to some minor concerns raised by a stakeholder over the use of some pictures that were only used to visualize what designated industrial property are. So you may see on slides 7 and 8 a couple of different pictures that don't have anything or any bearing on what we're presenting today, and you might not even notice that they're different, but we just wanted to make sure that you're aware that those are two different pictures.
Thank you.
So we'll start our presentation off. Explaining who we are. We'll give a breakdown of the annual operational cycle in the Provincial Assessor's Office. We'll point out important dates and timelines. We'll talk about the requisition rate and that timeline. We'll explain the type of property described as designated industrial property. We'll talk about the overall 2023 assessment year provincial role, and we'll further talk about the City of Fort Saskatchewan's inventory and how it compares to the previous year. We'll also share relevant updates on our DI property assessment in Alberta. The presentation should take about 10 to 15 minutes and leave us some time for questions. So who we are your designated industrial property assessment team working on behalf of the provincial assessor. We are a multidisciplinary team of professionals with diverse backgrounds in property assessment, engineering, accounting, geospatial and data analytics, project management, quality assurance, and with advanced computer capabilities. So the team prepares, amends, and defends the provincial assessment role. This then allows municipalities to impose a property tax. Interesting to note, and we'll see later, that the provincial assessment role this year is $195 billion. So within the Provincial Assessor's Office, the leadership consists of Victoria Bachman as our Executive Director of Assessment Services Branch. We have Mike Menard as the Director of Centralized Industrial Property Assessment, as well as he is the Provincial Assessor, appointed Provincial Assessor. We have Michael Tauchin as our Director of Linear Assessment and Data Management. Our other managers mentioned here oversee the day-to-day operations and the efficiencies running of the branch. It's important to note here that the leadership team is always available to offer necessary clarifications regarding the assessment issued to your municipality. So the Assessment Services Branch prepares the provincial assessment roll, and once completed, sends it out to respective municipalities in Alberta. Individual notices are equally issued to the DI property owners. Thereafter, parties are allowed to make inquiries that we will respond to. If the inquiries are not addressed to the satisfaction of the property owner, then they have the right to file a complaint. We defend and amend the assessments as required. Then the cycle begins again with property inspections, the collection of an analysis of data collected for the next year. This is a very simplified, as there are many cogs in the wheel, maintaining confidence of the stakeholders, providing stability and consistency of the assessment role, and continuously improving accuracy, transparency, efficiencies, and communication is a large part of what our department does. So necessary timelines to be noted are captured here. Mail out of the notices were at the end of January for linear and at the end of February for our industrial properties, with December 6th as our mail out for our supplementary assessments. Not noted here is the dates for filing complaints. Linear was yesterday, and industrial property complaints deadline is on May 10th of this year. New from last year is stage 1 RFIs. So that's a request for information that we were talking about, that Mr. Krim was talking about to the residential. Previously, a request for information was sent to property owners in August with a time frame of 90 days to respond. The introduction of an early RFI will be sent to all the major facilities to report new projects that have been completed in the first portion of the year. This gives us an allowance of more time to prepare the assessments for our supplementary assessments. So the requisition rate is based on the provincial assessor's role and the amount required to operate centralized industrial property assessment. In March of this year, a ministerial order is prepared and approved by the minister. The order is sent to the CAOs with updated requisition rates. In April, the Municipal Affairs website is updated with the new rate, and municipalities with designated industrial property will apply the requisition to the eligible properties. This requisition is collected, and payments are remitted to the Government of Alberta within 30 days of the taxes being due. In January of the following year, a tax requisition reconciliation calculation is sent to the CAOs in allowing for those unpaid balances that reflect to be reflected in the upcoming year. So there are two types of properties in our inventory. The first is linear property, and it consists of property that is often cross-jurisdictional between properties or between municipalities. This includes pipelines, wells, telecom and distributions, electric power systems like electric power generation, and railway. Industrial property includes all facilities regulated by the Alberta Energy Regulator, the Alberta Utilities Commission, and the Canadian Energy Regulator. These include well sites, batteries, compressor stations, etc. Major plants are listed in the Machinery and Equipment Assessment Minister's Guidelines and includes oil sands, gas plants, pipeline terminals, pulp and paper and lumber mills, refineries, and petrochemicals. as I said earlier, the provincial roll is 196 billion. I think I said it was 195, but I meant to say over 195 billion. With this, the tax revenue for Alberta municipalities is $2 billion, and approximately 339 million is for Alberta School Foundation Fund. The 2018 to 2021 witnessed a rather steady assessment with total value of the provincial roll at about 171 million. The 2022 AY witnessed a significant leap, amounting to an increase of 6.5% or around 184 billion in designated industrial property in Alberta. Similar trend again this year with another 6.5% increase and now 196 billion of DI property. In total, your municipality contributes just over 1.97 billion in assessment to the provincial roll. This is an increase of 47 million, about a 2.4% increase from last year. This comprises of 2.1% change in the industrial properties and 3.25% change in the linear properties. On the industrial side, the majority of the increase came from replacements, upgrades, and maintenance of existing facilities. The three main contributors include Dow, Wolf, and Lindy. You can see from the increase in the dollar difference of 33 million is in machinery and equipment and almost 4 million in the land and or buildings. The linear assessment increased 3.25% overall, gaining 4.8 million. This was primarily from the increase in the assessment year modifier and an increase in telecommunications from TELUS adding some new equipment. In October 2020, the minister at the time made an announcement that there was to be no new assessment on new wells and pipe assets for the next 3 years. This was called the tax holiday. This means that no tax was to be collected on new wells drilled or pipelines laid for the 2021, 2022, and 2023 assessment year. This tax holiday will expire this year, the 2024 tax year. So your municipality, there were no new wells drilled, and the new pipelines were laid amount to $3.29 million. This amount can be used to make a better prediction of tax purposes in your 2025 tax and beyond. The assessment model review. A little history of the assessment model review. In 2019, Municipal Affairs launched an assessment model review to update the models used to assess wells, pipelines, and the machinery and equipment. The potential impact with these proposed updates created significant stakeholder concern, and the review was put on hold. Now the government is committed to developing a long-term review plan, and this plan is being considered at this time with a 4-stage engagement strategy that involves all relevant stakeholders. So we are currently in stage 2 of our assessment model review update. And with the assessment year modifiers, that should say the 2023 Minister's Guidelines were approved, and the 2023 assessment year modifiers have been updated and are available on our Municipal Affairs website. So our branch appreciates the opportunity to engage with our stakeholders. Participating in in-person presentations like this is one way. We also appreciate the early information sharing and involvement on upgrades and new projects within the City of Fort Saskatchewan. We recognize that the importance of the work we do, and we realize that we need to work with all stakeholders to create a fair and equitable assessment. We'll continue to support your municipality on all DI property assessment matters and welcome you to reach out at any time. So with that, I thank you for allowing our time for this presentation, and we're here to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you very much. We'll move right into questions. I have Mayor Ketcher first.
Okay, thank you. So I guess the question that I have, one, can you explain again when the Alberta government took over the assessment of heavy industry and why? Because what I heard you say is you collect the taxes, we have to reconcile it then, and then you forward us the money that's due to us. So
Sure, I can help clarify some of those. So centralization was created in 2018, so it's been since 2018 that our department was recreated, I guess, because it had been that way numerous years ago. But and the reason why is because there were some inconsistencies on the application of the regulated assessment regime. So bringing it into one body was a request from industry that it be done by a central body that can create the consistencies required. So, and clarifying what you said about the tax collected is we set that requisition to pay, and it's the requisition is a calculation based on what it takes to operate centralization, and we send the requisition to the municipalities to apply to the industrial sites, and they are in essence paying for the centralization.
Okay, but you don't collect the taxes themselves?
No.
You just provide us what they are, the
That's correct.
assessment?
Yeah.
Okay. And next question, on the lineal assessments, now I know a number of years ago the province was talking about doing a change to the lineal assessment. Are they all equal now, or do the municipalities still have the ability to put down what they require out of the lineal assessment for taxes?
That's a good question, and I should confirm this, but as much as from what I know, no. Sorry, would you want to rephrase your question or ask it again? I need to
Well, it's
understand.
just regarding the lineal assessment, and I know a number of years ago, I don't know if it's 2, 3, or 4, but the provincial government was having issues with municipalities and how they were collecting the taxes for them, and it was so unequal between different municipalities, and there had been talk of the province coming in and making them equalized.
I do recall some of those conversations, but that did not occur.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's just what the wealth within your municipality, or the linear assessment that's within that municipality, is what that municipality collects taxes on.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
One more popped up. Councillor Abitoye.
Thank you for your presentation. So you talked about a 4-stage review that you're doing. What is the expected outcome of this review? Is it going to be higher taxes? Like, what is the expected outcome of the review you're doing?
So currently, the assessment, the regulated rates that are within the machinery and equipment guideline are very outdated. Will it increase the taxes? I think the expected outcome is that it will balance out the taxes. So there's two sides that are like municipalities and in the province and industry, and I think that we're not going to reach an end goal unless the taxes are, there's not much impact to the taxes. So I think that's their end goal. But to also the real end goal is to bring those rates up to existing technologies today and costs today.
So more taxes then?
More assessment, I would say.
More assessment. Okay,
Yeah.
perfect. Thank you. My second question is, so with the complaints that you receive, is there an appeal process for that, specifically for the industrial? Is this still the same way that we do it in the city? Do you have an appeal process?
Yes, and
Okay.
it's similar, although we go to the Land and Rights Property Tribunal versus a local or composite.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you. That appears to be, one more popped up. Mayor Ketcher.
Sorry, I should have asked this question. How do you work in alignment with the city's assessor? Like, how do the two of you talk?
Maybe I'll let Mike answer. No, I'm just kidding. I think we work very closely. He, of course, needs to understand the entire base of the municipality. We, of course, use his history and his knowledge of what did happen. But I think that assessors are a small community, and we all work together to understand what's happening in the province of Alberta. And one of the examples Mike used is looking at what happens in hotels in other jurisdictions, to say, oh, mine look a little low, I should do something more about it. And I think that I can communicate with Mike and ask him what's happening across the road from here. I see something happening, and he might know before I do, just because he's boots on the ground right in Fort Saskatchewan. Yes. Yeah.
Thank you. That appears to be all the questions for you today. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.
Just looking at the agenda, we don't actually have anything for closed sessions. So our last item is the investment policy. Does anybody want a quick comfort break, or do we want to go straight into? All right, we're going straight into it. I'll invite Clayton Northey up to come and discuss investment policy update.
So, forgetting what I need to say to start. To your Madam Chairman and members of the committee, my name is Clayton Northey, and I'm here today with James Hobson and Charette Shahal, who are presenting proposed policy updates. James and Charette are from CIBC Wood Gundy and have recently started working with the city as our investment advisory group. And with that, I'm going to pass this over to Charette and James.
Thanks very much, Clayton. I'm not sure if you can see me there, but good afternoon, Mayor and Council. Thank you very much for having us here today. As Clayton mentioned, we were awarded the Investment Management Services RFP last year, and we've begin sort of the process of optimizing the investments for the city going forward. Part of that process is the investment policy, which is what we're here to kind of chat about today. But before I get into that, just a quick background on our team. Within the CIBC Wood Gundy kind of network, we are the only institutional-only focused team. So we only work with public sector clients, including 85 municipalities, mostly in Alberta. And right now we're managing about $3.5 billion. So very well versed in investment policy for municipalities. And I think this is only going to take about 10 minutes, but there's sort of high-level changes that I think are important for the city. So first of all, this is sort of the investment process. Obviously, everything we do has to start with governing legislation. So everything must be compliant with the MGA. That's pretty straightforward. The next piece is the investment policy. Now, that's what we're here to chat about with today. In general, the investment policy is pretty robust. The changes we're making here today are going to make it a bit more flexible so we can maximize the rate of return for the city. And just kind of bring it in line with sort of your peers. We work with a lot of the neighboring municipalities, including the larger ones, and we want to make sure that sort of the standards that the city's investing by are in line with sort of industry standards. Next part in this process is the market environment and the portfolio management, which is sort of where we come in, how we're actually managing the money and allocating the investments. And then next is review and rebalancing, which is what we're doing today. So essentially, as markets change, as the economy changes, it can often become important to review and update your investment policy over time. So we've got a few changes here that we'll walk you through. Now, first of all, what does an investment policy kind of address? Well, in simple terms, it lays out these sort of objectives. So your risk tolerance, sort of that's first and foremost whenever we're talking about municipal investing. Return objectives. So essentially, once we're in that safe box, how can we maximize the rate of return we can on the long-term reserves to maximize the revenues for the city? The next is sort of your time horizon, which we'll address here as well. How long are we investing the funds for? Everything has to be structured surrounding your liquidity needs, and that's where sort of communication between administration and us, we kind of work together to make sure the investments are matching the city's needs. Legislative requirements, and then other considerations that are sort of unique to City of Fort Saskatchewan. Okay, so I'll jump into these sort of few changes that we're recommending right away here. So for the long-term portfolio, these next few slides essentially address what's called Appendix 1, which is your schedule of approved investments. So there's a few changes to this. Number 1 is a per security restriction. So what we're suggesting that you add is a diversification restriction limiting individual securities to 15% of the portfolio. Right now, anyone can come along if they're managing the portfolio and put 20, 30, 40% of the portfolio into one single investment. That's generally not sort of a standard practice. So the 15% security restriction, I think, is fairly straightforward just to ensure diversification. The next one is the institutional limit. So increase the institutional limit on Schedule 1 banks. So these will be banks like Royal, Scotia, BMO, TD, and CIBC. Right now, we're capped at 20% per bank. The issue here is that if we're capped at such a low level, if we're getting a better rate by a different bank, this restricts our ability to go and access that rate if we're capped at 20%. So industry standard is sort of 35% per bank. Still allows sufficient diversification, but gives us more flexibility to sort of improve the returns. The next piece here is the portfolio limit. So increase the limit on Schedule 1 banks, again, so the largest banks in Canada, from 40% to 75%. The rationale is essentially the credit rating quality that you've already got in the policy addresses your capital preservation mandate. So the current restrictions of having only 40% per scheduled bank, chart will show you a yield curve at the end here, but essentially we can access much higher returns for the city by allocating to bank bonds versus, say, provincial bonds or government bonds. So that one's really important to make sure we can access those bonds with the same security as a provincial bond, but just a higher rate of return. The next one's pretty straightforward, term limits. So some of the term limits were as long as 20 years. We recommend reducing all of those to 15 years. The rationale here is that anything that you invest in longer than 15 years comes with significant interest rate risk and price volatility. So it kind of doesn't align with our objective of liquidity and capital preservation there. Next is there's a small section on corporate bonds. We recommend just removing this completely. The MGA already kind of fully defines which securities that are allowable. So we just want to remove this to remove any kind of risk of misinterpretation, no matter who's managing the investments, just making sure everything's allowed per the MGA. So in a nutshell, this is what this is going to look like. So again, the major changes there, I talked about increasing the per institution limit to 35%. That's the highlighted there by Schedule 1 banks, with a limit of 75% of the total portfolio. And then again, everything restricted to 15 years maximum. Removing the line on corporate bonds, and then it's not shown here, but adding that line item on diversification. So those are kind of the main changes to that schedule. I'm going to turn it to Chart just to talk about a couple other considerations we have for you.
James, so the couple things that I wanted to touch base on, particularly when it comes to this schedule that's in front of you guys here, is if you guys look under other financial institutions, guaranteed investment certificates, there's a little asterisk for number 5 there. In your guys' investment policy right now, it reads for that note 5 in excess of provincial or federal government guarantees. So when it comes to that, the way you read that is essentially we can take the way the policy currently is, you could in theory take all your money and throw it into one credit union right now, the way this the portfolio limit is reading for 40%. The 40% is for anybody that is not guaranteed fully by a province. So rather than creating that confusion, we just kind of blanket come out and say explicitly limit all tier 2 banks, credit unions, and trust corporations to a portfolio maximum of 40%, whether they have a federal guarantee or provincial guarantee or not, because the policy is robust and it goes, the whole point of that appendix is highlighting things like issuer diversification, credit rating restrictions. We don't want to make any exceptions outside of that, because then we start to fall short of our objectives of liquidity and principal guarantees, because those principal guarantees can happen at a much later date. And from a liquidity perspective, there starts to come concerns. So rather than leaving it up for interpretation, we just wanted to make sure it's clear, remove that in excess portion. So all credit union GICs are subject to the same restrictions. So that's a fairly simple one there. From the other side of the investment policy, right now, your guys' return and performance standards, the benchmark that the city is using right now is the Alberta Consumer Price Index, so Alberta inflation. We recommend changing it from the Alberta inflationary numbers to a average Canadian consumer price index. The reason for that is provincial data, as you guys could see from the previous two assessment presentations, provincial data can kind of lead to a lot of increased volatility due to microeconomic data happening in certain pockets that doesn't necessarily reflect a national average of inflation. And then additionally, on the other side, from a returns perspective, the portfolio returns on all the returns we're using, whether it's GIC, bonds, provincial bonds, it doesn't matter. They're comprised of macroeconomic data. So there's kind of a disconnect between the microeconomic benchmark and the macroeconomic benchmark that the returns are looking at. And so what that generally leads to is what's called tracking error, which means that your benchmark is not accurately going to reflect the returns that we're looking at here. So we would recommend going from Alberta to a national average to more be in line with what the returns of the benchmark are subject to. The other one is conflict of interest. So you guys have a conflict of interest section in the policy right now. It's very well written. It kind of lists out the rules and regulations and the order of operations of what the internal managers or internal employees have to do. We also always recommend adding just a subsection reference to have a strict adherence to the CFA Institute Code of Ethics and Standards of Professional Conduct and the CFA Institute Asset Manager Code. The reason we always want to make sure we have reference to those two codes are the absolute gold standard in the investment industry. And by just making reference to those two pieces, which are continuously updated on an annual basis to make sure you always have the most relevant standards, it's designed as essentially a catch-all for your ethics policy to ensure that whoever your portfolio manager is, they're following the most prudent set of operations. So it's a very easy catch-all by just making a reference to those. That's from the policy perspective. I did include a very quick piece on just kind of our team's investment strategy, because obviously you guys, as council knows, is we're new to council as well. So just kind of touching base on our investment strategy. What I want to touch on today is particularly the yield curve, which James kind of mentioned here. What a yield curve is, anytime we do a presentation, we'll probably include one of these in there for you guys. It basically tells us what rate of return we can expect for the amount of time we're investing in. And the way you're going to read this curve is the green line is the Government of Canada, any Government of Canada bonds Government of Canada bonds. The red line is AA, and the green line is the A-rated issuers. Why this is very important specifically in today's context. The first one is right now, as everybody knows, interest rates are high. We're all waiting for the Bank of Canada to drop interest rates. So we know that this front end of this curve is going to come down quite materially. So what that creates is what's called reinvestment risk for us in portfolios, which essentially what reinvestment risk for means is if you buy a 1-year investment, let's say even at 5.5% or 5%, why would I buy a longer term investment that pays me a little bit less? Because chances are in a year from now, you're reinvesting that maturity at a significantly lower rate of return. So you want to make sure you're locking in high rates for as long as you possibly can from a return perspective. And then the other piece here, number 2, is that spread pickup that we can get. James kind of touched on moving from these Schedule 1 banks to increasing it to 75% without sacrificing credit risk. You still have the same safety of principal, but allowing us to go from essentially the AA line to the blue line. You can see that from a return perspective, we're getting over 1% per year by still maintaining the same credit quality standards that are subject to the MGA. Bank bonds and provincial bonds, a lot of them typically have the same credit rating. So we're not sacrificing we're not sacrificing in terms of increasing risk for the portfolio. So this kind of in a nutshell kind of goes from an appendix and restrictions to diversification. When James is going, we need to update it to give us a little bit more flexibility. Is to optimize the portfolio with what you guys are currently looking at. And then when we finally do set up the portfolio, just for you guys' sake, from a visual perspective, this is what it looks like. In our world, it's called a barbell. A barbell is just a terminology used for exactly that. It looks like a weighted, like a gym barbell where you have weights on both sides and an evenly distributed ladder. The reason you do that is you want to lock in high rates for as much as you can while still maintaining liquidity. The way we balance this with your guys' administration, who are really good, have been actually phenomenal to work with in terms of getting the portfolio set up, is your guys' short-term portfolio, your working capital portfolio gets an immediate boost from the high rates that are still in place right now, while still locking in anything we can over a year. And then in a year from now, when interest rates come down, that way the predominant amount of your portfolio is still locking in a high rate of return. That is a lot amount of information in a very short period of time, but I wanted to make sure we save time for questions for you guys as well.
Thank you very much. I will start on this one. So Clayton, I think maybe these questions are both for you actually. The first one, just because we're live streamed and people can go back and watch this, if someone's looking at this and saying, well, why do we even have an investment policy? What is the reason why the city invests money? How does that help us out?
Madam Chairman, we have an investment policy to help guide the investment decisions that we make, to make sure that we have the appropriate security and controls over how we invest the city's money, the taxpayers' money, as well as that we clearly state what our objectives are, what we're trying to achieve here, and in terms of both maintaining current operations through maintaining access to funds, making sure that we have protect for the principal portion of our investment of our funds, as well as to make sure that we maximize the return on our investments. Last year, for instance, we had a significant portion of our revenue was a significant portion of our revenue surplus came from investment revenue, and it's been increasing as our reserves balances have increased, as well as the market's changed over the last few years, to help offset tax impacts.
Thank you.
Just to potentially add as well, Clayton, to that, when you're looking at specifically municipal investment policies, just for administration and council's sake as well, right now the Municipal Government Act, it's very broad in scope. It just, in summary, just says don't lose money in the type of issuers. But you always want, and the investment policy is kind of the roadmap that customizes that broad definition for exactly the city of Fort Sask, because your objectives, although it's don't lose money, from a working capital perspective or a diversification perspective, are different than Strathcona County or the city of Edmonton or St. Albert, wherever it might be. So it's a way for us to refine it and define exactly the objectives for you guys.
Thank you. Thank you both for your response on that. My second question is on the catch-all phrase on the Code of Ethics. I just want to ensure that we're saying that that's what we want to add in. So we, in fact, as a city, are already well-versed on what those standards say, and we already are following those.
Through your worship, Councillor Macon, I think the addition of this clause is especially important, given that we're bringing in outside investment advisors to take on a larger role in our investment management process versus previously. To be frank, we do believe that we are following good practices. I believe that the CFA standard has a higher threshold for investment processes than what we would currently have, and I don't know if Shar wants to add on that one.
No, that Clayton, that's kind of, you hit it on the head there. Your administration has been following the order of operations that we're kind of referencing here, but the code and standards, both myself and James are CFA charter holders, so we know them inside and out, and it goes as far as everything from professionalism, how to look at from a order of operations standpoint, misconduct, fair dealing, suitability. It's basically a way to get fiduciary care in the industry in Canada, like a fiduciary duty to your portfolio manager. Whether it's used externally or internally, you've been utilizing these high levels of ethics before, but it's a way of just defining it for future, especially now that there's outside advice coming in as well.
Thank you. Going on to other questions, I'll move to Councillor Abatoye.
Thank you, and thank you for your presentation. When I think of the investment policy, I think about how we can, outside of other things, maximize revenue and minimize risks, right? And so I appreciate a lot of things that have been said because I see lots of, risk mitigations here. But my question is specifically on the portfolio limits to Schedule 1 banks. That's going from 40% to 75%. And all I can think of is why are we raising it so high? I understand that, it's safe with those types of banks, but I'm also thinking what kind of opportunity costs are we having as a result of this increase?
I can take that question. That's a great question. Through chair to council there. From our perspective as portfolio managers, the first most important piece when we look at what is essentially the risk of increasing bank allocations, from our standpoint, the most important piece is less about the types of issuers, is the credit rating. The credit rating is that's whose guarantee are we looking to get it back, right? So if you were buying a bond issued by Churchill Hall, that guarantee wouldn't be as good as from a bank or a province. So from our perspective, the Schedule 1 banks, a lot of the Schedule 1 banks have the same credit quality as the provincial issuers. So when you say the word like opportunity cost, it's actually the inverse. There's an opportunity cost of restricting yourself from not allowing enough banks versus the other way around.
Okay, thank you.
While not sacrificing any credit risk.
Sorry, I didn't hear that. Can you repeat
without sacrificing any credit risk to it.
Okay.
So we're not increasing the risk allocation. Right. We're just getting more diversification.
Got it. Okay, thank you. And my second question is, I don't really see investments like high yield bonds and derivatives. And I understand that we're trying to protect our principal and not, get into those types of investments. But I'm also thinking the higher the risk, the higher the return. So why aren't we limiting a certain amount? It might be very little, to play a little bit in those types of investments.
So very, very easy answer there. The Municipal Government Act doesn't let us buy any high yield or derivatives. It's basically banks, provinces, Government of Canada, and credit unions. To buy anything that's what's defined as at risk, you actually need to have an exception. To have an exception, you need to have a very large scope. I think City of Edmonton, City of Calgary, and City of Medicine Hat are the only ones that have that exception. But the first stop is you can't. From a legislative perspective, we can't.
Just to add to that, though, Chard, it's James here. There are some tools, though, that we utilize pretty extensively that allow us to access equity-like returns through a fully guaranteed bond. For example, we launched a note last week. The rate on it was 9.7. The reason it's so high is that has a link to the equity market in terms of its payoffs. So the reason we include those is because if you had a portfolio of the city's size, it would be prudent to include some equities in that portfolio if we removed the MGA restrictions, right? So this is a way for us to add equity-like returns within the portfolio while still being within the MGA. But I think your question is great. Like, how can we maximize while still being in the safe kind of box?
Exactly. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Councillor Harris?
Clayton, what's the total size of our investment portfolio in dollars?
Through the chair to Councillor Harris, I believe off the top of my head, we're roughly 40 million in a long-term portfolio with additional money in our short-term for working capital for money that we're going to be using over the next year. We've recently moved over approximately half of that to CIBC.
Okay, so we've got about $40 million under investment at the present time. Second question, obviously we've got investment advisors. They're paid to ultimately give us advice and manage it in a prudent manner in accordance with this policy. What role do the auditors play in relation to looking at it and validating that the direction that we're following in the investment policy complies with the terms of the audit engagement? Is there any oversight in that regard?
Through your worship to Councillor Harris, the auditors don't have an extensive role in specifically reviewing. I think what you're talking about is evaluating the prudence of your investment process. Our financial audit is focused strictly on the accuracy of the city's balance sheet and balance sheet, income statement, and the related disclosures there, and make sure their opinion always relates to the fact that there would be no material misstatements in the financial statements.
Yeah, I understand the process, but I think there have been examples of fraud in municipal government that weren't appropriately picked up in a timely manner. So what's the offset? I know these gentlemen working for CIBC, obviously have fiduciary responsibility to advise in an appropriate manner. But what ultimately is the second level of protection in relation to the fact that somebody within our administrative structure is not pulling a funny one, if you will?
Through your worship, or through the chair to Councillor Harris, the process the common and the practice within the industry would be to have either an internal audit function, a formal internal audit function, or an audit committee that provides oversight, or an audit and investment committee that would have oversight of that. Internally, we do review investments on a monthly basis within the finance department. We have a sort of an internal investment committee that we review our processes, review our cash flow requirements on an ongoing basis, and the opportunities that are out there. This augments that. The biggest protection that you have from the biggest protections that you have in place from internal fraud or internal misappropriation of funds within our investments are included in the investment policy itself. The fact that all funds are held strictly in the name of the City of Fort Saskatchewan. No, there's no funds that are held under a different name or a derivative name. All of the investments require dual approval, dual authorization before we move forward on making an investment purchase or liquidating an investment.
So our internal due diligence works in a team context up to the city manager in regards to a timely communication in terms of where we are, what we're sitting, what we're moving around. Does that happen?
Through your ultimately it's the CFO is kept informed or involved in the decision making. I don't believe we typically inform Troy of individual investment purchases. That said, we do that through our reporting cycles.
Okay, good, thanks.
Councillor Blizzard?
I'm okay with all the changes, but I'm going to just ask you to maybe go over, so out of 40 million, we have some of it in long-term investments. Can you explain, and maybe again for people listening, why we have that and put it into investments versus why don't we use it and lower our taxes?
Through your worship, Councillor Blizzard, these long-term investments really are our financial reserves. These are funds that, in particularly in our long-term investment fund, these are monies that are kept held by the city to pay for the replacement of infrastructure, to add new infrastructure like the JRC, the upgrade. They pay for just ongoing care and maintenance of large capital projects so that we're not being hit with large one-time costs on an annual basis when we say have to purchase a fire truck or do a major renovation to a building.
So the interest that we get off of those investments, do we use that in our day-to-day, or is that put back into the same accordingly accounts?
Through your worship, Councillor Blizzard, the majority of the funds are actually paid back in through general revenue through and offset taxes. there is a portion that we have increased that portion with updates to the reserve policies over the last few years to have more of those reserves, particularly the ones that are capital replacement reserves, to be interest bearing, so that the interest gets transferred over to those reserves automatically. And the reason for that is to offset inflationary pressures. So essentially, as we're contributing funds, we're also contributing increases to related to inflation on an ongoing basis, so that we have enough money to pay for those replacements.
Okay, thank you very much. And I'm going to say this is a good time to invest anyways. A few years ago when interest rates were like 0.1 or something, we didn't get much money back. So at least we're getting something.
Thank you. Mayor Ketcher?
So, first of all, so our person who is providing us the advice on this is from which bank?
Through the chair to Mayor Ketcher, this is CIBC Wood Gundy, is the financial institution. So they're part of the CIBC group.
Okay, so I guess the question that I have, so they're providing advice saying you should, like, the years don't seem to make that much difference when you're talking about risk. So, but when you come into talking about the amounts, I come back to the point where we had saying 40% at 20 years, 40% at 10 years. And I think that risk is pretty good, because then you're putting it against different banks. So would you get the same indicator from other banks if you were to go to them and say, okay, when you look at our portfolio, is it better to have the risk spread out as opposed to saying all of a sudden now I can put 75% with one investment person who's going to make a whole lot of money off you? So that's my question.
Through chair to Madam Mayor, just to answer that question real quick, that 75% portfolio limit is to total aggregate financial institutions. So it's not just to CIBC. Us as your portfolio managers at CIBC Wood Gundy, we are not bank loyal, we are client loyal. So we have actually open architecture. So we don't care who the issuer is, whether it's Bank of Montreal, TD Bank, Scotiabank, or CIBC, whoever it might be. Our job is to get you the best rate of return. So if when you're looking at your guys' schedule there, that 75% portfolio limit is for total to banks, not just one institution. The one institution would be that 35% per institutional limit. So 35% can go to CIBC, 35% to BMO, 35% to TD. So total bank 75, total issuer 35.
Okay. And I guess the other question, you're talking about the different banks being, I guess, was level ones, schedule twos. So just talk about the difference between the banks. So more or less, which ones fall in the top ones that would get investments, because you also indicated credit unions. So just talk about the difference between these.
That's a great question. So your five major banks like CIBC, TD Bank, Bank of Montreal, Scotiabank, National Bank, would be Schedule 1 banks. We don't actually, as us as an institution, don't ever buy Schedule 2 banks, Laurentian Bank, anything like that, or any credit unions. But from a credit union perspective, the reason we do still leave it in is from a working capital portfolio, it still gives clients flexibility when you're optimizing your working capital reserve, because this policy, although it is restrictive for it guides us, it also is restrictions and policies in place for your internal administration for their working capital portfolio. So we recognize that and don't want to just completely limit it. But from a Schedule 1 banks, it's your five major banks. We actually, it's Bank of Montreal, CIBC, TD, BMO are your major ones.
Okay, so I guess when it comes to these, would you be recommending any of these Schedule 2 ones? I'm just curious.
Us as portfolio managers, we've never recommended Schedule 2 banks. We always stick to Schedule 1 banks because going back to that credit quality piece from an A rating, from the way we look at it from a yield perspective, although they could be paying us more than what a Schedule 1 bank, there is inherent risk of taking on a Schedule 2 bank versus a Schedule 1 bank. So from our perspective, we're not being compensated enough to go out there and take that extra yield pickup. So we always generally stay, when we're looking at our portfolios will always stay within that Government of Canada, provincial bonds, or Schedule 1 banks only. That's how we have always managed long-term portfolios.
Okay, I appreciate that. I'm very conservative when it comes to investing, so because I don't like
Yeah.
a lot of risk, and I don't like a lot of risk for our citizens either. So, okay, thank you.
That's a great comment, and you're exactly right, because this is tax reserves we don't want to be taking any risk with, so we want to make sure that we properly define what that risk actually means. So we are very definitely aligned on the conservative nature.
And just to reiterate, everything in the portfolio has a principal guarantee at maturity. So from a finance perspective, we're not buying anything that has sort of stock market risk, anything like that. Everything has to have full principal guarantee at maturity.
Thank you. Move on to Councillor Nguyen.
Yeah, just a quick question. Seeing as we're adopting a financial advisor here for the first time, how often will we be receiving reports from them or updates?
Through the Madam Chair to Councillor Nguyen, at this moment internally, again, we meet with them at least monthly, as well as if there's any issues that would come up in any issuances that might be worthwhile investing outside of that. We will be incorporating the information that we have from them into the interim and annual reports as well. I believe that CIBC, Wood Gundy, Shar, and James will be actually coming in front of council in, I want to say, late September at the September Committee of the Whole to provide an economic update to the city ahead of the budget. If that answers your question.
It does. Okay, we'll see them in September then. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you, Shar and James, for being here today. Thank you, Clayton. I think next steps are, I think it's scheduled to come back May 14th to the regular council meeting. So we will see you then. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next, is there any councillor inquiries? Councillor Abatoy?
Yes, thank you. I got asked about organics programs with respect to senior lodges, and I wanted to ask that question. So I'm guessing that will fall under commercial. So do you have any information on that?
Through the chair, yes, I believe the question was, is the organics program available to commercial or institutional properties? Yes, it is. It's on a voluntary basis, so they can work with the utilities clerk to get set up for that service.
Okay, so just reach out to the utilities director then?
Correct.
Perfect, thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Not seeing any. As I indicated, there is no closed session for today. So with that, I'll call the meeting adjourned at 3:51.